I'm quite hyperbolic on the channel sometimes, but when I say this brings a smile to my face, I really mean it. The best bleach in the world couldn't wipe this smile off. I've been looking at this New York situation and wondering to myself, can Comrade Mamdani just walk in that mayor's office and wreck the city like he wants to? Are there no safeguards in place to stop him from doing what he wants to do? Is he gonna make the Big Apple rotten? And then, boys and girls, as I was on that quest, I discovered something really beautiful. Something from wise men in the past, who must have envisioned a day when someone like Zohran Mamdani would take control of the city and made a law that would make it nearly impossible for someone like that to wreck the city. That law has a very generic sounding name, the Financial Emergency Act, and it comes from a relatively obscure year, 1975. But it's going to mean everything for New Yorkers in the next few years. We're going to be reading all about this from Charles Gasparino of the New York Post. And he says, Mayor-elect Mamdani reeks of Lenin, but New York City's wise safeguard against Marxism stands in his way. Mamdani's victory speech reeked of Vladimir Lenin after Russia's 1917 communist revolution. But instead of commanding a Red Army, the mayor-elect should be aware he will be facing lots of red ink. That's on top of some very strict and sensible financial rules put in place some 50 years ago, just in case a deranged Marxist ended up running New York City. Yes, socialism can sound rousing when it's pitched by a skilled orator. Mamdani spoke of soaking the rich, failing to mention, of course, that they're already paying some of the highest taxes in the country. He ranted how the poor will finally have their day in a city that already doles out everything from free healthcare to subsidized housing. He also dared President Trump, who is in D.C., undoubtedly watching the spectacle, to turn up the volume as he doubled down on his vision. Free buses, government groceries, more welfare, and free trans medical treatment, even for children. But New York City, with plenty of welfare statism already on the books, will never go full Soviet Union. That's because laws must be followed, even by a 34-year-old backbench lefty assemblyman with a degree in Africana studies who visions himself as the second coming of Fidel. Those laws include something called the Financial Emergency Act of 1975. It was the brainchild of former Governor Hugh Carey and his outside advisor, the great philanthropist and investment banker Felix Rohatyn. It was designed to prevent another politician-made catastrophe like the fiscal crisis of the 1970s. When the Big Apple nearly went bankrupt and began to implode fiscally and socially. Cops were laid off and garbage piled up because we had no money and no one would lend to us. The budget was such a mess, no one knew if they would get paid. The mayor at the time was Abraham Beame, but years of bad government, perverse spending, and spotty accounting contributed to the mess. President Gerald Ford, while all of this went down, famously told the city there would be no bailout from D.C., Drop Dead was the headline of the day. That headline was seen by every New Yorker. We were on our own, but we had the political infrastructure to create reform. Carey, Rohatyn, civic leaders, bankers, and more. They cobbled together a budgetary infrastructure that, believe it or not, lasts to this day. New York City spends a lot of money. It has a $119 billion budget and a vast welfare state that includes health care for the indigent and much more. It also has huge amounts of debt to pay for this infrastructure. An amount almost as big as the entire city budget itself is owed to bondholders. Accordingly, it also has high taxes. So high that businesses and even high earners were fleeing even before Mamdani's victory. And yet we know where all the so-called bodies are buried because of the Financial Emergency Act. No matter how many freebies Mamdani doles out, how many grocery stores or rent-free apartments he creates, bondholders get first dibs on city tax revenues because Carey and Co. knew that we need them to keep buying debt or the place shuts down. On top of that, Mamdani must balance his budget based on stringent, generally accepted accounting principles. By law, ladies and gentlemen, he cannot end the year with a budget deficit, or something known as the Financial Control Board takes over the city fiscally. It's chaired by Governor Kathy Hochul, who has said she won't raise taxes over fears of an exodus of the dreaded 1% who pay most of the bills. Of course, the days of Hugh Carey and Felix Rohatyn are long gone. Hochul claims to be a moderate, but she has been caving to the mini Mamdanis in the state legislature for years. The comptroller is repped on the control board, and he's a leftist. Mamdani has a seat as well, and don't expect any help from the commissars on the city council. The business community is hollowed and politically irrelevant. But the law is the law. Our new mayor will face multi-billion-dollar budget gaps that will need to be plugged in the next fiscal years. They will only grow if bank earnings sputter or Jamie Dimon moves more of JP Morgan to lower tax locales like Texas. For Mamdani to pass his agenda and balance his budget, he will need a tax raise, and a vicious cycle will begin. Taxpayers will bolt. Bond downgrades will follow, heaping even more interest payments on the city. The budget deficit will grow and control board oversight looms over a budget crisis that could make the 1970s look like a cakewalk. Back then, at least, many big businesses outside of banking were still domiciled here. The outer boroughs were populated with stable, middle-class neighborhoods. But today, much of that is gone. Even the stock market is diversifying with a viable rival starting in Dallas. Mamdani's power to run the city like Lenin will be severely diluted unless he wants to cede control to Hochul or ask his pal Donald Trump for a bailout. When the Donald responds, I have a hunch how the headline will read. Orange Batman steps in to save Gotham. And you know how Batman saves. He beats the crap out of the criminals first. He's not the hero Gotham needs. He's the hero they deserve. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not all. Me and Grok got to work and listed more laws that are going to make it very hard for Zohran. Actually, you know what? Grok is lazy. I did all the work. Zohran has proposed rent freezes in rent-stabilized apartments to freeze the rents for 4 years on 1 million units and then build 200,000 new rent-stabilized homes over 10 years and give tenants more rights than landlords. But the Ustad law prohibits New York City from enacting rent regulations stricter than those allowed under state law without explicit state authorization. Sustained freezes risk legal challenges from landlords under state law for confiscatory rates, potentially violating due process. State preemption prevents New York City from independently capping rents citywide. How about his really popular policy, making the buses free by dedicating lanes for buses, which would make everyone else's traffic worse? First off, if you're making it free, more people will use it, and that means more time being spent at each stop, which means even more delays. An 8-mile journey will take an hour. You could have just gotten on a bicycle. Plus, this is going to cost up to $1 billion. New York State Public Authorities Law, Section 1200, establishes the MTA as a state public authority with control over New York City transit, including fare policies and budgets. The State Transportation Law, Section 15, grants the state oversight of mass transit funding and operations, preempting local fare changes without MTA board approval, which the governor appoints. So the MTA must approve fare eliminations, as buses generate 19% of their revenue. Mamdani is going to need the governor's approval, and she has previously resisted similar ideas due to budget strains. They can expand the bus lanes, but making it free is going to be blocked without state approval. His universal child care, what could go wrong with the government taking care of your kids? That one I don't see him having a big problem with. It's just going to be really costly and goes back to him being forced by the Financial Emergency Act to balance the budget. He wants to raise the minimum wage, but the state deals with the minimum wage, explicitly preempting localities from establishing higher rates without state legislation. He can't unilaterally raise the wage. Tax increases on the rich, and more specifically, white neighborhoods, according to Zohran. The problem is the state raises taxes, not cities, and Kathy Hochul is not on board, because at least she has enough common sense to know that the ultra-wealthy who pay like 60% of the taxes anyway are just going to leave to Florida. How about city-owned grocery stores? He wants to build 5 subsidized stores, 1 per borough, on city land, then buy wholesale to lower prices. While there's a law that regulates municipal enterprises, it requires competitive bidding and limits direct competition with private businesses to avoid antitrust issues. Mamdani can initiate this via executive order. It's going to invite a lot of lawsuits, and funding might need state grants. To be honest, I want them to do the grocery store thing. I want to see just how committed he is, because it's going to blow up in their face, and I want to see how that looks. The voters are going to be confused why their options decrease, and hopefully they realize the grocery industry comes with a very low profit margin. You're not making billions, and when the government gets in and becomes your competitor, You just don't want to have your store. You'd rather move elsewhere. And how about his Department of Community Safety? Well, once again, state law sets standard for mental health services, but diverting 911 calls risk legal challenges if it delays responses. State preemption on criminal procedure limits decriminalization elements, like reducing misdemeanor enforcement, which involves DAs. Man, that Financial Emergency Act is gonna make his life heck. And I love it. Thank you all very much for watching. God bless and goodbye.